Welcome to Why Don't We Dress for Dinner Anymore with host, senior style icon, and horse jockey, Theodora Crockman. Got a little horse on your shirt there.
And Melissa Pierce, natural redhead, and boho chic queen.
Oh, that's me.
We'd like to welcome our guest today, Professor Linda Przybyszewski. Welcome, Linda.
I
earned a PhD in history from Stanford University, where she trained as a legal historian, a field which she also publishes. She is currently an associate professor in the history department at Notre Dame, and her book, The Lost Art of Dress, The Women Who Made America Stylish, she reveals the untold story of a remarkable group of women in the first half of the 20th century, the so-called dress doctors, who taught American women how to dress and spearheaded a movement toward beautiful, economical, and egalitarian fashion. Professor is also a skilled dressmaker from a long line of women that may be the only scholar to lecture in the Supreme Court in a suit that actually won a blue ribbon at the county fair.
Wait, Linda, you have to tell us what lecture in a suit that won a blue ribbon at a county fair. Is this a dress you made?
it's a suit that I made, and I think I wore that one. I've been at things at the Supreme Court before because my first book was on justice on the U.S. Supreme Court from the 19th century. And then I also collaborated with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on publishing the memoirs of that justice's wife. And so there was a ceremony there. So at the Supreme Court, they have these sort of giant, beautiful chambers where they have various kinds of lectures and things. So, so I came and gave a talk about my justice, and that was the suit that I had entered in the Hamilton County Fair, which Cincinnati is in Hamilton County, and that's where I was living at the time.
Wow. That's kind of amazing. And what a time to be a Supreme Court history scholar, not to venture too far off the topic of fashion, but holy wow, what a time to be a witness to history, knowing what you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we start with some of the interesting stories that you have in your book, The Lost Art of Dress. And you talk about this group of women that I have never heard of before called the dress doctors. Can you just give us give our listeners a little bit of a background about the dress doctors, and how did they communicate their message of lovely yet economical and egalitarian dress?
Yeah, these were professional women in the very early 20th century. A lot of them came out of the home economics movement. Some of them were actually housed at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which had a Bureau of Home Economics in it designed to help farm women. And within that bureau, there was a division of clothing and textiles. So they drew on traditional sort of Western rules of art composition, but then applied them to dress. So they took what people had talked about for centuries about paintings, and they said, well, what if we use these art principles and apply them to a real, living, moving body, and brought beauty into women's lives? Because one of their ideals was making, as you said, democratic.
Yeah.
Right? These bringing art, bringing beauty, which they saw as a spiritually uplifting value, into people's lives. Like, everyone can't own a painting, right, but everyone has to get dressed every day. So why not bring beauty through form, through color, through line into their clothing, and allow them to share in that beauty too?
Okay, and in this time in our country, I'm thinking about, there were beautiful dresses well before this. We think about the courtesans, etc. So is this not something that we had already? Or was it because it was being professionalized, or what was happening there?
Well, a couple of things were happening. True, it was professionalized in that these women essentially became a sort of group they worked in home economics. They also worked in teaching. They gave talks at women's clubs. They wrote books that were bestsellers, just to spread the word about beautiful dress and how it could be obtained. They also sort of regularized these rules, the art principles. They identified 5 different principles that should be applied to dress in order to create beauty, harmony, emphasis, especially on the face, so people pay attention to what you're thinking and saying, balance, rhythm, and proportion. And they wrote textbooks. They wrote textbooks for junior high school girls, for high school girls, and for college women as well.
Wow, I'm sure, I don't even know if they teach it anymore, but way back, when I was in, we used to call it junior high, which was 7th and 8th grade at that time, the girls had to take home economics, and the boys had to take wood shop or like car mechanics or something like that. And I'm trying to think back if we had a textbook. I remember we had these old Singer sewing machines, and we would learn basic dress structure. And so the dresses that we made were very simple lines. Like we made sheath dresses, where you have the little darts in the front and just a straight up and down dress. We would make, I think, what was the other thing we made? A-line skirts were another thing, So the main focus on home economics was to learn the basics of sewing, how to put a zipper in, how to put darts, how to use a pattern, those kinds of things. I'm trying to think if they encouraged any kind of creativity. And as far back as I can remember, I'm not, because I did enjoy the sewing. And I'm trying to think back, did they really encourage creativity? And they really didn't. It was just more or less learning the basic structure of clothes. But from doing that, and I know you said you come from a sewing family, a sewing background, I think, and maybe, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but I think the process of actually making a piece of clothing just automatically stimulates something in you creatively. Because I remember as a 12, 13-year-old, I'm making this A-line dress or this shift dress or whatever. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, you know what? If I take some of this fabric and I just sew it together and put a little elastic band, I could make a matching headband. Or I could remember triangle scarves in the 60s were very big. I could cut a triangle and make a matching scarf for my dress. So it kind of, even though it was just like the basics of sewing, it kind of stimulated some level of creativity in me, at least. I don't know, can you speak to your own experience? Because I know that you do enjoy sewing and that kind of thing. Would you say that the process of sewing in and of itself feels creative to you? Or does it just seem more mechanical and engineering?
Yeah. Well, I think the two are combined. I think it's a form of soft engineering, right? Construction. Yes. You need to figure out essentially a blueprint and put it together. But at the same time, you have the artistic, aesthetic elements of color, as you were saying, of what else could you do with a remnant, right? That's available to your mind too. To me, the really interesting thing was when I read the dress doctor's works, they did want every girl to be exposed to sewing to find out if she enjoyed it, but they never insisted that women should do it if they didn't enjoy it. They didn't feel they had the time. So they saw it as they themselves found it an amazing creative opportunity. But, right, if you had other things to do, if you were a busy, young mother, if you were a businesswoman, if you were a college student with just a ton of work to do, or if you hated sewing, they said you don't have to do it. It's fine. That's great. Don't worry about it. You can still, for example, go shopping and keep these principles in mind so that whatever you spend your money on, right, will be beautiful, will also suit your life, right? You'll spend your money in a wise way because it will be something that you'll want to keep for a long time.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I can't even remotely think of anything that exists like that today.
There are so many fashion rules today.
Or not.
Right. Or not. Devil may care, or you've got to fit in this like exact thing.
Yeah.
Like makeup rules always change, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
But these are artistic principles. They didn't even call them rules, right? They were principles.
Yeah.
It was like the ethics of fashion, if you will. Like just follow this and you will never get steered wrong. Is that what the dress doctors basically did?
They argued that the principles transcended time. And they transcended fashion styles, right? So in any era, regardless of what fashion was offered up to you, you could choose, if you kept the art principles in mind, something that was truly beautiful, and that would suit you in particular and suit your life. So they were aiming at something bigger, which they thought, was a reflection of what existed in nature to some degree, right? That, imbalance in anything is kind of disturbing. A tree that's been hit by lightning and looks like it's tipping over. There's something about that, they said, that just doesn't make you feel comfortable. Whereas if something's balanced, right, like I'm wearing formal balance. If you cut my dress in half, both sides are the same. That makes people feel good. You, however, we have one person in formal balance and one person asymmetrical. One of the things they used to say about that kind, right, of design was, well, that's design that's dynamic. It's design that is also more likely to be for something playful or social, right? As opposed to something you wear into, an office where you have to prove you're really competent at accounting, for example.
I see. So this, to the dress doctors, what I'm wearing right now, I would not walk into an office to present our final numbers because I would not be taken seriously enough.
Well, because to them, something like informal balance, which is what you're wearing, would be for social occasions.
I see.
Right. And you have to realize that they had what they called the 6 occasions for dress, which to some degree we've thrown out as a society, but not entirely. So the first one was school. And when you reference the simple clothing of a junior high schooler, well, they wanted her to wear simple clothing too, tailored, so it didn't get in her way, right? So that it, no drooping sleeves, no clanging bracelets, something that was easy for her to move in, easy for her to get her schoolwork done in. Now that's obviously part of the life cycle, school, right? Mm-hmm. At some point you're done usually. And then they talked about business, which they thought you should look sober, precise, exact. Obviously, we're trying to look competent. Housework, which was supposed to be dressed for something that was warmer. Seeing it as, right, you're part of a family center, right? So those kinds of colors should be friendlier, warmer, more cheerful.
Interesting.
I find that so interesting that there was even a way to dress when you're cleaning up. Because I mean, most women, now I'm deriving my references from the 50s through the 60s. And I'm thinking most of the housewives in my neighborhood, when they were cleaning the house, they were wearing house dresses. Remember those snap-up house dresses? Did you ever see any of those?
Yeah, but were those
snap-up house dresses that had little like prints on or something? But to actually think that anybody put any thought into the clothes that they were wearing to clean the house, I find amazing, because
you have to wonder if the people who made those house coats, though, did follow those principles because they are friendlier, they are warmer.
Oh, yeah. It's like you're wearing a big bag with snaps on them.
That's right. But they were like in pink with.
Yeah, they weren't black, right?
Yeah.
They weren't navy blue.
No.
Right? They were a small print.
It was usually a small print of some kind, or some loud prints, kind of moo-moo-ish. We used to call them moo-moo looking things. But, this was in the 50s and 60s was well before women were wearing blue jeans or leggings like we do now, that kind of stuff. I mean, women almost always were wearing some form of a dress or a skirt, even if it was around the house. Even the house coat was a dress when you think about it.
Yeah. How long were pants controversial for?
Yeah.
When did we get over that?
Pants have been around since
but
a long time.
Controversial for women. We talk about
and they were a fashion statement, but they weren't considered like appropriate, to be wearing out too many other places. So I think it's interesting that they even had a rule on what to wear when you're cleaning your house.
What to wear. So they had school,
housework,
work, housework. What were the other three? Because I'm like,
Sports.
What?
Sports. So athletics.
Okay.
Right? Or watching athletics. Yeah. That's
which is not social.
It's spectator. No, but that's what's so interesting. Spectator sports, part of it was, think about football, to stay warm, right? So they wore these woolly tweed suits because you needed to stay warm.
Yeah.
Also, it might be kind of dirty, right? You're outside and people are wandering around with food and whatever. So a woolly tweed suit, it's got a pattern on it. You can kind of brush off anything anybody drops on you.
Oh, now I'm going to watch so many more old movies just to see if these principles are followed.
They do.
Oh, you watch them. They're all there.
I tell Melissa doesn't believe me. I'll tell her, you watch old movies and people are dressed up at the baseball game.
Yeah, that's a spectator sport. And and this is the funniest thing is you said, well, did anyone why would anyone bother to think about what they were going to wear for housework or for a baseball game? On the one hand, I think a lot of people, it's because there are so few rules today, think of all this as a burden. Mm-hmm. You also need to think of the flip side. It's an opportunity.
Yes.
Right? Oh, I can wear.
Right.
I'm going to go to spectator sports. So if it's the summer, I should have a cotton dress. So that'll be cool. And I could have a big hat so my face doesn't get burned.
It can look cute too.
Right. It's summer and I would love a beautiful color, maybe a print. I love flowers, right? So you can see how women also saw this as an opportunity. And you see that especially for afternoon clothing and evening clothing.
Yes.
Because that's social. True, it does happen sometimes in public, but the whole idea was, well, who do you spend your evenings with? People you know well, right? And evenings are a time when, unlike housework, you don't have to worry about things being washable or tough, right? You're not going to be scrubbing anything. So you can really have the opportunity, indulge in the opportunity to have, beautiful, fragile fabrics.
Yeah.
That otherwise wouldn't fit into your day-to-day work because you might ruin them. And why would you want to do that, right? So afternoons and evenings then and they even talked about it at home evenings, right? Not as an obligation, but as a sort of pleasure, right? That you could come home after a hard day at the office or a hard day scrubbing floors in someone else's office. And then you could put on something really beautiful, right? Some sort of loungewear.
Yeah.
And oh my God, their loungewear makes us and our leggings just look
I used to love
boring.
Right. I was going to ask you about leggings because we wear them for everything now.
No, the loungewear was more glamorous.
Right.
Oh, it was beautiful.
It was like flowy pants, halter tops or flowy poet blouses. It wasn't, when you think of loungewear, you're thinking of Lululemons now. This couldn't be further removed from Lululemon. Yeah. This was really...
I'm like, did the 80s ruin us?
They would have what they called...
I think they did.
Hostess outfits. And
hostess gowns.
Hostess gowns. And they would be, I remember Lucille Ball on the old TV show I Love Lucy used to wear these beautiful, like it was a blouse with a matching pant. So it was like a cigarette pant. But wrapped around the pant was like a skirt, a full long length skirt. But there was a separation about 3 or 4 inches in the middle. So you could see the pants through the skirt.
That's why.
And I used to think that was so glamorous because she could walk in and swirl the skirts. It was, and that was considered a hostess outfit. You were hosting a cocktail party or you were hosting a dinner. So it was what you wore at home, but you wore it to look dressed up, but you're in your own home. So it's not like you would wear that to go to somebody else's home. That was specifically for when you were hostessing an event. So there were even outfits that were specifically for hosting an event in your home.
And you can see it as a kind of celebratory clothing, right? That it would be of a richer color as well as a richer fabric. And you could really enjoy that. So in some ways, right, like I said, obviously having a lot of rules right, can seem a burden. But I always say, think about the pleasure, right?
Yes.
I need an evening cape.
Right. I don't have an evening cape. I need to go out and buy one.
Everyone needs one, right?
Who doesn't need?
Come
who doesn't
on.
need
A
that?
cape is
Right.
great. It doesn't crush your clothes. That's I always love a great cape.
Oh gosh.
Because when you go out in the evening, if you're wearing a coat that's too tight, it'll wrinkle your dress. And by the time you get to your destination, you're all wrinkled. But a cape will always keep you looking.
We need to introduce
very
Linda
chic.
to Maggie, who's got a closet full of capes.
Yeah.
Remember, Maggie was like, "Oh, I've got a
Yeah.
cape for everything." She loves capes. So, I have to ask. Fashion operates in cycles. We have this revolution and this nostalgia. And what history lessons from the dress doctors would be most valuable to revive in today's fashion? We're looking at what's happening. Everyone is wearing, I don't know what they're wearing, mostly leggings, sneakers. We do have some fashion, but it's kind of frenetic and all over the place. Given our current political landscape of this nostalgia and revolution that we're talking about in fashion, what would the dress doctors say to wear, say to a revolution, or to celebrate ourselves when we are looking for these islands of coherence or being together? Like, are there rules for revolution?
Well, it's on the one hand, right, we have fashion, which is literally style trends over time, right? So
Yes.
those altered. And sometimes the dress doctors, some of them objected to them. And other times they said, well, right, you don't have to do the most extreme, right, the shortest skirt if it doesn't suit you, right? If it makes you look goofy or if you find it uncomfortable to move in, then just shorten your skirt a little, but don't go all the way. I remember in particular, there were two dress doctors who were not happy about the invention of the blouse.
Really?
Which they called the waist or shirt waist. And they said, well, if you cut the figure in half, it's very chunky. Why would you do that? And I understand their logic. At the same time, it became so clear that the blouse made life so much easier for working girls. And I'm saying girls because they were literally teenagers, right? Young women would work sometimes from the age of 14, right, until they got married and had kids. Right. So they were teenagers.
That's where that phrase came from, working girls, is because they were actually girls?
Well, I think that's part of it. And then, of course, there was a sexist.
Of course.
Girls, they never became grown-up women. That's part of it, too. But I always think, right, I got 14-year-olds going out to work, right, in the late 19th, early 20th century because they were done with school at that point, and they were supposed to go do something before they got married and had kids. And I've totally lost my point. What was I talking about?
I know that feeling.
We were talking about the dress doctors and
the shirt waist. So they worried about it, but it became so clear. And this is why all these other dress doctors, in fact, the majority of them said, no, this is a good fashion. Because instead of a dress, one piece, which was at the time hard to clean, right? Because if it washed, the whole thing had to dry out and get ironed, right? What a pain. But if you have a little blouse, you can wash it out at night and get it clean. You can have a really small wardrobe, right? And still be clean and fresh every morning if that's what you want to do. And they don't cost very much. So there was a democratic principle at work there. And they applauded that, right? So they could, as long as they saw fashions that allowed women to live by the art principles, and some of them were like, one of them is harmony. Part of harmony is shape. Part of shape is the idea you can move in your clothing.
Yeah.
Right. So any clothing that cripples women, shoes is the most obvious and persistent example in ways that you would never ask men to try to move, right? You never say, hi, put on this pump that's got a platform and see how far you can get, right? You wouldn't.
Exactly.
Right? Those kinds of things they would object to, but they had an interest in fashion trends and wanted to draw on what was useful, right? Or what was beautiful, whatever that came up.
Okay,
right?
So how would they feel about the leisure wear of today, which is basically yoga pants and a t-shirt?
I think they think it was really boring and you had lost a fashion opportunity, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Right, because it is easy to move in.
It is easy to move in, and it's really boring. No, I think it's so funny because my students will say, wow, we're so much better off than with people in the past because they had dress codes. And I say, well, look around the room. All of you are wearing the exact same thing.
So in a way, you do have a dress code.
You do have a dress code, it's just not written down anywhere.
Right. Well,
So,
can I take a step back? Because you piqued my interest when you were talking about the blouse. And it seems to me, and tell me what you think of this, it seems to me that the blouse was also the beginning of the ability to have a kind of a capsule collection. In other words, you could mix and match your clothes so you could stretch your wardrobe further. Because think about it, if you had a simple white shirt like I'm wearing right now, you have a simple white shirt, you could wear this with a million things. You could wear it with print on the bottom. You could wear it with just a black skirt on the bottom. You could wear it with a full skirt. You could wear it with a straight skirt. So you could have a different look just by changing up the bottom, or the same thing with the skirts. You could wear the skirt with different color blouses. So it kind of would seem to me that it was kind of the advent of kind of the capsule wardrobe, the mix and match, the stretching, which would make it more egalitarian because you don't need as many clothes. Because a dress, like you said, is a one and done. You wear it, that's the look, and that's it. But if you have a blouse and you have a skirt, or you have a couple of skirts, you can make many outfits just by changing out the tops or the bottoms.
Are you saying that dress doctors had a scoop on Donna Karan?
They did. Well, actually, Donna Karan, her father was a tailor, and from what I can tell, literally studying some of the patterns that she did for Vogue Patterns years ago, I would say it's clear she was reading and looking at some of the more complex and really, to me, as a historian, but also as a dressmaker, really interesting garment making books from earlier in the 20th century. I.e., she used certain techniques about draping and cowling and stuff that you see in works published in the 1940s and 50s, for example. And I always thought, I wonder, because her father was interested in the garment trade, right? So if she was exposed at an early age. But there was a really, and that's the thing too, when you talked about the leggings, there was a much more sophisticated understanding of design and construction, of literally how you can manipulate, right, two-dimensional cloth into the 3 dimensions to cover the body.
Yeah. So it was, the draping of the clothes was an art in and of itself. Also, Donna Karan is very simple, classic kinds of things. So it was, like you said, more in the structure of the outfit as opposed to big, loud prints or pleats and things like that. When I think of Donna Karan, I'm thinking of, like you said, cowl necks, draping, jersey, a lot of kind of flowing, clinging to the body, but comfortable kinds of things. So, my guess is, she was looking at patterns and things from the early 1900s all the way up into maybe the 1920s. The 1930s, again, too, a lot of bias cut. It was more in the 30s, it was the cut of the dress more so than anything, because it was always, whenever I watch movies in the 30s, it's always backless. The interest was always in the back, instead of being the low cut front, etc. But, all that being said, going back to the no rules kind of thing, what introduced me to you was an article that I had read in the New York Times by Vanessa Friedman called "Why Don't We Dress to Go Out Anymore?" And the article spoke to me because it's basically the premise of this podcast that Melissa and I keep asking all of our guests is, how did we get here with fashion? Like you said, there's a lot of opportunities with the dress doctors to say, oh, I have the opportunity to dress like this when I'm going to this event. I have the opportunity to dress like that when I'm going to this event. Where now it appears that really everybody looks the same, no matter whether they're going to the office or they're going to a ball game or they're going out to the backyard barbecue. I cannot tell you how irritated I get if you go to the opera, which used to be a place where everybody dressed to the nines, and you go to the opera and people have jeans and backpacks with them and they look like they're going to go camping. So in this article that I had read by Vanessa, she quotes you as saying that this casual modality of dress started in the 1960s when people started to question rules and conventions. So can you expand on that a little bit more? At what point did you see the scale tipping in the 60s where there was a rebellion against, we know that there was a civil rights movement, there was the women's movement, and there was the anti-war movement. So there were a lot of movements and things going on in the 60s. Do you think those, anti-establishment kind of movements is what spurred the change into dress? Can you expand on that just a little bit more?
Sure, right. It's a combination of those things and also simply the demographic bulge that was the baby boom. So there had never been so many young people at one point who thought that they knew more than their parents.
They still do.
Which I guess every generation thinks for a little while, and then most of them figure out they probably don't.
Yeah.
But so that coincided as well, right, with some serious challenges to the powers that be. As you mentioned, right, the civil rights movement and the women's movement and the anti-war movement, and right, realized that all of these authorities had been saying things that it turned out really weren't true, right? That, well, African Americans don't deserve full equality, or that women are incapable, right, of taking certain kinds of jobs, or finishing their educations, etc. So once young people started to question older people's values, right, dress rules and the art principles then became yet another, what appeared to be wrong or arbitrary, right, set of rules imposed from the top down. And anything that was valuable in them was just nothing. The whole idea was, well, they're all wrong, right? It's just another set of made up rules they did to oppress us somehow.
Yeah.
And that should just be jettisoned. And so there really was a rejection of the idea there should be any rules about appearance or dress, right? And so these things were literally rejected, but also it became kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that they also became forgotten. And the one other thing that's happening that wasn't coming from the young people, this was actually coming from men in academia, as they looked around their universities in the post-World War II era, right, when the biggest concern was keeping the Soviet Union, right, from winning the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed the best idea was to take all the university money and direct it towards science and technology, right? So why would you fund home economics, even if it had textile chemists in it, right? Or child psychologists, or right, any of the nutritionists in it, if you could fund hard science? And so they gutted those schools, sometimes distributing them into non-existence, right? Okay, if you're a textile chemist, you go in the chemistry department, etc. And so that dismantled the place where costume and textiles had one of its homes, right? Fashion schools, i.e. design schools, were another place. Retailing was another place. But this was the place at land-grant universities where home economics had its home. And it also coincided with the women who had really championed home economics in the 30s, kind of reaching the age of retirement.
Yeah.
So as those women, they got shoved out, they got retired out, and you know, to a lot of people, that because of the women's movement, that seems like a logical thing, right? Why should the chemist be in home economics when she could be in the chemistry department?
Yeah.
Well, prior to that time, and actually not until the 1970s, she wasn't welcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Home economics at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, just like home economics and land-grant universities, was the one home women scientists could find where they weren't discriminated against. Right. And that's why they were there, because that was the place they were sort of allowed and given. They thought, okay, this is great. We can do this work. Let us do this work. But as I said, with the Cold War and the emphasis on technology and science, they thought what the women were doing wasn't important, so we'll get rid of it. And they did. And so that's the other way in which any kind of teaching on applying principles to dress just disappeared.
That's interesting. I never even thought of that or knew about that. You know, to me, the 60s was an era of rebellion. And I'm thinking the young people really were dressing, like you said, anti-establishment, anti-parent. You know, up until the 60s, most women dressed just like their mothers. You know, they look like mini versions of their mothers. There wasn't a big differentiation between the way an adolescent girl dressed and her grown mother dressed, when you think about it. You know, there wasn't, you know, when you look at the old movies, the one that plays the grandmother would like sometimes be wearing like this floor length dress with the lace bib or whatever. But the mom and the daughter almost looked identical in the way.
I would argue with you on that.
Really?
And I think it's stuff that we don't necessarily notice in the details.
Yeah.
But essentially, until the 1960s, the idea was there was kind of a cutoff at 30.
Mm-hmm.
Draped dressing, draped clothing, more sophisticated colors was for the woman over 30. Under, right, more tailored wear, brighter, pure colors, blue, red, yellow, not something like blue, green that's grayed, for example, right? So there was a clear distinction in the kinds of design, the kinds of details, the kinds of colors that were given to the adolescent girl and were given to her mother.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because when I watch most of these old movies, they're in black and white.
They're in black and white. But the other thing that's going on too,
but the structure of the dresses look almost identical to me.
Yeah, and they were close because the whole idea was the adolescent girl is in training to become a grown woman.
Right.
So they were in essence training dresses.
Well, this is what really like training dresses.
I know that's where my brain went. Sorry.
Oh, no, but think about it. Teenage girls would own a suit.
Yes.
They would own a suit
because last time you saw a teenager wearing a suit.
Right. Exactly. Like it literally.
Yeah.
But to me, that's the one thing that tells you they were in training to become adults. Right. The college women were told, remember, make sure you have a suit because it's the thing you're going to use the most, the thing you're going to wear to class.
Right.
Okay. Right. So it's a way in which the goal was to look like an adult.
Right.
With the 1960s, the goal became to look like you were 16.
Right.
And unfortunately, at the time, older women were told they should do that too because youth is everything.
So you're saying after World War II, here comes the Cold War. We're focusing on the hard sciences. We're also pushing women out of the workplace because they're taking all the men's jobs. That's my understanding of what happened after World War II. Right. And then professionalization of jobs that women were in started happening, such as computer programming, et cetera. This was all women before the war ended, and then they switched it to men, et cetera. So you're saying what also happened at that period wasn't just that women were being pushed out and kitchen science was no longer something that was interesting because it was feminine, but also they were told to dumb down, become young. They are now children. So you're saying it was honestly just, it sounds anti-woman to me.
No, well, anti-adult, yeah, woman, absolutely sure. But notice those are different things. Okay, so the move science and technology, right, pushed by completely different people. The youthquake came from designers,
Yeah.
and from the young themselves, and then it got taken up by marketing big time. And it was like, everyone needs to be wearing these young clothes. You need big giant flowers all over you, and you need to wear them even if you're 62. Right?
You're saying it was nearly coincidental that these two things happened at the same time. This was not like a big cabal.
It's like a perfect storm. I would say.
That's incredible. And I'm like, oh, are we still clawing our way out of this? Have we managed to graduate past it at all in the way that we all dress?
Well, to me, what's really striking is in the 50s, models did work. The top models did work until their 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
And, from the 60s, 70s onward, they would have been considered over the hill, or they'd have like a special feature on the older woman, as though, being in your 30s or your 40s is really, really old. So I don't think we've ever quite recovered from the youth quake.
Yeah.
And its effect. And one of the things is, and this is when I talk about forgetting or losing, the sophistication of construction. They stopped teaching in design schools how to design for the woman over 30. It was called sophisticated styling as opposed to young or youthful. And in the 1960s, they said, well, that's really not fashionable, so we just won't talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
But it also meant they didn't learn how to make certain sorts of garment construction.
For the woman who has had 3 children, she needs something.
The woman who wants drape design, the woman who wants a more sophisticated color palette. The idea was the colors in some ways reflected the mind, right? That you got wiser as you grew older, but you also became a little more discerning about color too, right? So that you would say, well, I don't want a bright, bright blue. I really like a blue-green that's a little bit of a pastel. Why don't I wear that, right? Instead of Kelly green or cobalt blue, right? Because I'm not really feeling like that's what my brain is doing anymore, So that the notion was, I say to my students, we slow down, yes, as we age. We also calm down.
Yes.
Which is probably a good thing.
It is a good thing.
But the idea was that then that kind of more sophisticated clothing, it was like you look forward to being 30. Whenever I hear or read someone going, oh no, I'm 30. And I think, you little baby.
Right. I know these big markers. Oh, I'm turning 30. I'm so old. And I'm thinking, gee, you have a short lifespan of 30.
Right.
My 30's old. Then you're the majority, 3/4 of your life in old age,
My son is turning 30 tomorrow, and he's like, I'm just too old to be doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, what, you little baby?
Well, and I remember that too, being, a child and in my late teens, in the late 60s and early 70s, a lot of the rules, like you said, started to fall by the wayside. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, you would literally be thrown out of school. They would remove you from the school for the day if you were a girl and you came to school in anything that resembled pants in any way, shape, or form. And I went to a public school. It wasn't like I went to a private religious school. If you wore culottes, which is basically a skirt that has a crotch in it, it's a split skirt. But if you put your legs together, you look like you're wearing a skirt. If the teacher saw you wearing culottes, they would literally remove you. You would be suspended from school for the day. That's when I was 14 years old. It's probably around 1968 or so.
And we had a dress code when I was in school in the 90s, right? And you had to wear sleeved shirts. Your pants couldn't be you couldn't wear shorts that were like 4 inches above your knees. But then I have a teenage daughter who, when she started high school, there was a very strict dress code. Girls can wear spaghetti straps or whatever. And by the time she's graduate, which is this year, they've thrown out the dress code altogether because the students were just like, this is gendered. This is awful. You know, you can't do this to us. We should be able to wear what we want. But then I heard you say, and I've been gnawing on this in the back of my head, you know, my second brain, you said to your students, yes, you don't love those rules, but look at all of you. You're all wearing the same thing. There are unspoken rules. And I'm like, oh, what are the rules now that no one has written down? What are the principles they're living by? Like, where are we? Where would the dress doctors say that we are now? Like, what the rules are? Are we living by anything?
Yeah, I think they'd say mostly they'd be really surprised that everything had become so informal that everyone seemed to be wearing athletic wear.
Yeah.
Where it's even though they were not doing anything athletic.
although I mean, I guess it's spectator, but also, I mean, we're a consumer culture now, and all we do is consume media. So maybe that's perfect.
Well, I think that there are influences that come out of the media, especially, pop singers, right? So I think what happened is you get this emphasis on casualness as in itself a value, which would be fine, except that then nobody knows what to do when they have a serious, right, even a social event. They don't know what to wear. They're like, oh my God, there's a wedding. I have nothing. What do I do?
And they literally don't have anything.
Right. And they panic, right? But there's also, as I said, this sort of athletic look, which again to them would be, well, that's fine if you're doing sports, but why would you want to just wear black all the time?
Yeah.
When there is a rainbow of colors. I've been known to bring into my class the Pantone color fan.
Yeah.
Pantone the color. Well, if there's a fan of literally thousands of colors, and I just sort of go, okay, here's some colors you probably never thought about and I just spread it out, right?
Yeah.
And they will just get dizzy looking at, how you can run from little shade difference to little shade difference, from amethyst to lilac.
Yeah.
Right? It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that they would have found really surprising. For example, as early as the 30s, they said, could people stop wearing black at night? It's so boring.
Yeah.
And when you think about all the colors, even if you want to stay dark, right, there are literally, the palette is almost unlimited that women could wear. They'd say, why not? Why not really enjoy yourself with some of these gorgeous colors? This is right. Especially for them, the evening was the time when you could indulge in any color. So why would you wear something really sober and boring when you can wear something really gorgeous?
And for them, the principle of the evening was because it's social, but you're with people who are familiar with you and you can be more yourself. Was that
right. That there's certain notion, and this is obviously another change from today's society, right, of the impersonal and versus the intimate, right? So this, if you're with a bunch of people well, and that, for example, they know you're crazy about France, well, then you could wear like a funny print with French poodles or Eiffel Towers all over it, and it would be fine because everyone knows it's playful and you're enjoying yourself. Well, you wouldn't wear that dress to work.
No.
Right? Because to them, those people aren't your friends. Right? They're people you are working with in order to get certain things done. And yes, you're friendly to them. You're not hostile, but they're not people to whom you would confide your thoughts. So this is a pre-Facebook era.
And maybe this is too in the weeds. I'm like, oh, then is all of this athletic dressing and not being creative in the way you dress, is this like an effort for privacy, since we live in public so much now in all of and maybe that's too big for this, but I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting thing to chew on. Is this what we're doing? Because so much of our lives is public now, that there is like the celebration of dress is almost like showing someone your art. Is it just too personal? Is it too?
Well, my question is, do they ever dress for each other that they know well?
I
do.
I wonder. You do, but
I do. I dress
Right.
for, well, I've always enjoyed fashion. So, most people aren't big fashionistas. They dress for utilitarian reasons. Like you said, they dress more business-like when they go to work. They dress in their athletic wear most of the other times. And then when they have to go to a wedding, they have to run quick to a store to buy something that looks halfway dressy because most people don't own that kind of clothes.
and we are talking about Americans.
Yes.
And very specific to this
to
country.
me, when dressing is my power. When I walk into a room, I want to make a statement, whether the statement is, hi, I'm friendly, or I'm here for business, or I'm whatever. I always think of my clothing as making a statement about myself. I don't see that happening so much now. Everything's become so generic. In the late 60s, early 70s, when we started to wear more casual clothes, blue jeans were accepted. By the time I was a senior in high school, we were wearing blue jeans, which, like I told you, when I was a freshman, you couldn't even wear culottes. So there was a range of dressing, but there was always still some fashion style. There was a lot of fashion and style. Right now, it's just put on whatever makes you comfortable. I went to a store the other day. My husband and I, not a store, my husband and I went out to Sunday brunch. And young girls are walking in and they look like they literally fell out of bed. They look like they still had their pajamas on. They had bedroom slippers on.
Oh, that's a big
shorts. And it was, hello, we're in Chicago. It was 50 degrees outside. They had short sweatpants on, bedroom slippers, not a drop of makeup. Their hair looked like they had just stuck it up in a bun that was like falling off their face. And I'm like, really? You can't even, Sunday brunch used to be kind of like a nice thing that you go after church or whatever, you get dressed in your Sunday best or whatever. I see people, I'm not a churchly person.
But look at it this way. I always say, duh. Well, look, first of all, young people were never taught anything about how to dress. Not their fault. Just set a good example. And at some point, some of them will look up and say, that woman looks really elegant. I think I'll aim for that.
Well, you want to know something? And I'm trying to be modest. I'm not mean immodest, but I cannot tell you how many young girls compliment me on my clothes. Really young girls. I mean, I'm not talking, 30, 40 years old. I'm talking about 15, 16-year-olds. I was at an event. A friend of mine has a podcast as well, too, and she had a big soiree for it. And I dressed up for the event. This woman comes over to me with a little 13-year-old girl, her daughter, and she says, excuse me, but I just have to come up to you. My daughter was admiring the way you were dressed, and she just wanted me to come up and tell you. And she said, and then she brought her daughter and her daughter said, yeah, I really like your outfit. It's so cute. And I thought, that's so sweet. But this is a 13-year-old who's appreciating the way a 71-year-old woman is dressed. Think about that.
Teddi, you always look great.
No, but think about that. It's not that they don't appreciate it, like you said. I think they just don't understand how to get there.
Well, they don't expect it either because they have been taught something different about how older women are perceived.
Not even older women, just about how they dress themselves.
Not even mature women, but
because their moms aren't giving them the example either. Now we're kind of getting long in the tooth here, but I have to ask you at least the last final question. I phrased it a little differently than we do some of the other guests because we've talked about this quite a bit. But do you see us ever getting to the point where we lose this total casualization that we're in right now? And if you do, what do you think would spur that on? Like that 13-year-old that I told you about who liked my outfit.
Are we going to rebel against the rebellion?
Is there a point that you see where this is going to change, where people may start to pay more attention to event dressing, to wearing, special items for special times of the day, for putting together clothes and appreciating the art of dressing? Do you think that will ever return, or do you think we're kind of stuck in this utilitarian, I just want to be comfortable mode for the rest of eternity?
Well, if everyone reads my book.
And your book is, remind us
The
the name
Lost
of
Art
your
of
book, and
Dress.
we'll also put it down on the podcast. But
The Lost Art of Dress.
The Lost Art of Dress. And I believe I saw it on Amazon. It's still there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We still sell hundreds of books every year.
Yeah.
And it's been out for a while. So,
Yeah.
but, I think you will always see pockets of people, even young people today, who either they get some training in art history or they simply have a kind of natural interest, for example, in color. Who do dress differently, right? There are pockets of people everywhere saying, you also see pockets interested in vintage clothing precisely because
Vintage.
it has very often more details, more sophistication in the cut, etc. It would, you see sort of the two great dress revolutions of the 20th century were the 1920s and the 1960s, both coinciding with kind of challenges to authority figures everywhere. At the same time, you see eras in between them where, for example, even think of the 80s in power dressing and Donna Kamen, whom you brought up,
shoulders.
where a whole bunch of women said, I don't want to look like the secretary. I want to look like I run this corporation. Right? And they wore suits, super serious, but quite well-cut feminine suits in order to do that. So I think this is going on all the time at some level for some groups of people. I mean, this is a huge country.
Yeah.
I'd be really amazed if everyone, was doing everything at the same time everywhere. But I would say I do think there is a persistent kind of hunger, right? Quite frankly, for the kind of beauty and dress that the dress doctors advocated for.
Yeah. In fact, when you brought up vintage, that just reminded me of the resurgence now in 2025 of a lot of the looks of the 70s with the bell bottoms and the halters and the platform shoes, the kind of boho chic style that was early on with the hippie movement in the early 70s. And it'll be interesting to see if that develops into, remember, the disco clothes, which became more glamorous, very sparkly, the one shoulder kind of thing became
which is a
very
throwback to
big,
the 20s.
So it'll be very interesting to see if that interest in vintage, because a lot of people, like you said, are more interested in vintage clothes, if that spurs on the desire for more structured style, rather than just, I'll throw on a pair of Lululemons and my Uggs and go.
Well, now I also wonder with the tariffs, with all of the tariffs, with all of fast fashion, we're cut off from fast fashion.
Yeah.
We're going back to vintage because none of the bullshit that we buy right now, pardon my language, is going to last very long. And we're going to start thinking about durability and style much more in the forefront.
So sustainable movement may move us towards buying better clothes, less clothes. Because like you said, the fashion people are buying $10, $15 dresses, where you buy maybe a dress that's a little bit more expensive, but will last and stay in style. Well, that may bend us more towards a stylish.
We are strong believers that it's going to happen. We're going to rebel against the rebellion. Everyone is going to read your book. We are going to recall that adorning ourselves is so lovely and worth doing, and that we are worth it. And we're going to revolutionize the idea of self-care is no longer buying beauty products, but just recalling that we are fabulous creatures in awesome costumes.
Well, we hoped Professor Przybyszewski, did I say that right?
Przybyszewski.
Professor Przybyszewski. That's a mouthful.
I know.
Thank you for coming on our show. You were a very interesting and delightful guest. And keep doing the good work you're doing, because when your students learn about color and the wonder of fashion, maybe that will start to translate into some kind of, you could start a movement at Notre Dame where you're going to have the fashionistas coming out the doors when they graduate.
Right. Well, she's doing fashion and also law. So...
Well, let's not get into that now.
That's a whole different show.
Yeah, that is
it's amazing. I'm
thank
so
you so
happy.
much. Thank you so much for coming on our show. You were a delight. And like I said, we will put your book title down in the comments below our podcast. So people who are interested in reading The Lost Art of Dress certainly can pick up that book and dig into it. There's a lot of fascinating components to your book. I just read certain snippets of it, but it was very interesting. So thank you very much.
And where can we find you otherwise to learn what you're up to in the now?
Oh, to tell you the truth, I do not have, I had a Tumblr for 10 years. And then I realized I really had to finish my legal history book. So I was not going to write on fashion history until I was done with that.
But your legal history book is about the Civil War, right?
Well, it's in the late 19th century, my next book. Yeah. But I do hope to be, after that book is done, after the legal history book is done, I do want to write about fashion history again. So with any luck, at some point you will hear about me again in another book on the history of fashion.
Fabulous. Well, when that book comes out, we'll definitely give you a jingle and talk to you again because we want to hear more about your really interesting perspective on fashion and all of its beauty and wonder and expression. So thank you very much for coming on our show today.
It was my pleasure.
Yes. Thank you. Now, Melissa, let's ask that final question.
Teddy, why don't we dress for dinner anymore?
I don't know, Melissa. Why don't we? Thanks for listening to Why Don't We Dress for Dinner Anymore? Please remember to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. That really helps people find us.
And if you're a brand and want to sponsor the show, please email us at whydon'twedressfordinner@gmail.com, also linked in the show notes.
And if you're a fabulous person and you want to support our work, join us on our Patreon or take us out to dinner sometime and we'll be sure to dress up for you.